The Chinese government's getting ready to show some love to US exporters this Valentine's Day. From February the 14th, Beijing will halve tariffs on a host of American goods, as agreed under the Phase 1 trade deal reached last month. And that's driving global stock prices higher.
You've seen a big increase in Asian markets overnight. European investors are also very happy because remember when we discussed it last month, the details of that Phase 1 deal weren't really made public, and what was made public was very thin. And we're beginning to see some early hard numbers reflecting the rebalancing of Chinese and American relations.
The tariff cuts apply to 1,717 goods that are imported to the mainland from the US. Tariffs on some of these goods have been slashed from 10% to 5%, while other imports will now face a 2.5% tariff instead of 5%. Collectively, US exports worth $75 billion will now face lower taxes in China, while the higher rates will remain on $35 billion worth of US goods for now. Washington is expected to reciprocate the deal, which could boost demand for Chinese goods in America. In 2019, the US trade deficit narrowed for the first time in 6 years. And US President Donald Trump says trade with China will be a lot more favorable for American businesses from now on.
I also promised our citizens that I would impose tariffs to confront China's massive theft of America's jobs. Our strategy has worked. Days ago, we signed the groundbreaking new agreement with China that will defend our workers, protect our intellectual property, bring billions and billions of dollars into our treasury, and open vast new markets for products made and grown right here in the USA.
While both sides are finally cooperating on trade, there are still a number of disputes between them. Washington says Beijing needs to change its laws that force foreign companies to transfer their technology to Chinese partners. It also wants the mainland to stop subsidizing Chinese exporters. Beijing accuses Washington of unfairly targeting Chinese firms like Huawei. It also alleges Washington is exploiting the spread of the coronavirus after US Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said the disease will encourage businesses to move out of China.
Justement, les États-Unis.
The United States and some other developed countries, despite having strong capacities and advanced equipment for preventing the epidemic, were the first to take excessive restrictive measures.
Both sides have agreed to continue negotiating over the remaining differences. Although businesses on both sides can look forward to some respite soon, the relationship between the world's largest economies will likely remain rocky. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, Stefan Legge joins us now from Zurich. He's a lecturer at the University of Saint Gallen, focusing on international trade and political economy. Welcome to Money Talks, Stefan. Now, as we heard there, China has made quite a significant gesture as part of this so-called Phase 1 trade deal. I think a lot of people were skeptical about the detail of the agreement, but now we're seeing it actually come to fruition. What's your response to what China has announced? Is it a significant step in resolving the trade war?
I see it more as a signal to the US and to the world that China intends to ease the conflict with the United States. Many people have not noticed that China has cut its regular tariffs several times in the last couple of years. So import tariffs in China are now lower for products coming from all over the world, but not from the United States. And they're still much higher than before this trade war. But it's a first step towards easing the trade conflict with the United States.
And as we know, part of the Phase 1 trade deal was that China had promised to increase its purchases of US goods to the tune of $200 billion over 2 years. Now, a lot of people were skeptical at that large amount and whether or not China could actually fulfill that. Do you think they will? And is this announcement perhaps a reassurance that China does intend to fulfill its promise?
I think it's more a signal to the US or a signal of goodwill, because China will have a hard time keeping the promise of buying an additional 200 billion. If you look at the number, it's a very, very steep number, 200 billion in addition to the current imports. And this will only be possible in China if there is massive amounts of trade diversion. That is, China will buy more from the US, but less from other countries. That's the first problem. And the World Trade Organization will be hearing a lot from various countries complaining about this, including the European Union. In addition, the Phase 1 agreement says that China will buy these goods at market prices. And it's going to be interesting to see what these market prices will be. Just one example, if the demand for oil in China is going down, the price will likely go down. And then I don't see how they will keep up their promise of buying 200 billion worth of additional goods from the US.
Now, during the State of the Union address the other night, Donald Trump proudly proclaimed that his trade war with China had worked, that his strategy was successful. Do you believe that to be the case? After all, China has now offered to cut a significant amount of tariffs from US imports. Has Donald Trump's trade war worked?
Well, Donald Trump is currently focused on one thing, and that's the election in November. And of course, he has to tell everyone that his strategy has worked. But keep in mind that tariffs in China on American products are today much higher than they were before this all started. And all the other concessions, the additional purchases worth of $200 billion, we have to see whether that even materializes and how and under which prices. And in addition, other concessions like better protection of intellectual property is something that China would have done anyway. So unfortunately, I must say, Donald Trump's policies towards China have achieved very little. If anything, the situation is worse than before. And this is not a victory if you look at the facts instead of the rhetoric.
Okay, Stefan Legge, we'll have to leave it there. But thank you so much again for your analysis.